What comes to mind when you think about Benedict Arnold? My guess is that you are probably thinking something about how he was the first, well-known traitor in American history. He started out as an American general, defected over to the British, and then, so the story goes, he became one of the great villains, maybe the first villain in American history. And as the years went on, the story, of course, becomes more and more involved, more and more negative towards Arnold, and he's kind of been crystallized as maybe the first villain of the American story. Now, there are a lot of myths when it comes to the American Revolution, so I think it's entirely possible that the common person's understanding of the American Revolution is that, a bunch of guys got together, they signed the Declaration of Independence, they put together all these, revolutionary ideas about rights and liberty and all that stuff, and then George Washington went out and fought the war, and then that was that, America started. So while those founding fathers and those, people who contributed to that were very influential, the American Revolution was much more of a ground-up operation. There were a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, a lot of lower level, just militia operations and, regular people who had an impact, and oftentimes they get overlooked. So I think that myth that the American Revolution was all the work of, just George Washington and a handful of other guys like Thomas Jefferson, that needs to be dispelled. That's not going to be the subject of this particular episode, but maybe one in the future. Another myth has to do with just George Washington himself. A lot of people think that he was this fantastic general and, he single-handedly won the American Revolution. So if you actually look at the military history of the American Revolution, George Washington spends most of the war essentially making mistake after mistake and getting his butt kicked by the British. So while he did do some excellent things and while he was able to ultimately lead the country and lead the war effort, and it was a successful war effort at the end of the day, George Washington made some mistakes, and George Washington was not perfect. So I think this great man version of history that we often associate with the American Revolution, particularly in our textbooks and all that stuff, we need to dispense with that myth as well. To me, what makes George Washington a successful leader in this story is the fact that he's a reluctant leader. When you look at his writings and things of that nature, he doesn't seem to want to grab the power, to want to take the power. And then at the end of the war, of course, he doesn't take an opportunity to, allow his presidency to go any longer than 2 terms, which is, I think, a significant moment in American history. So to me, George Washington's, the respect I have for him doesn't come from his feats on the battlefield. It's more about what he did, allowing political needs to supersede military needs, which to me is always an important aspect of successful campaigns. And then also, of course, him not seizing that power at the end of the day and stepping down as president when he had the opportunity to do so. So along the same lines of some of these myths of the American Revolution, we get to Benedict Arnold. So again, that common story is that he's the ultimate villain, and that's kind of how he goes down in history. So in this episode, we'll explore that myth of Benedict Arnold, and I'll posit that it's entirely possible that if Benedict Arnold never existed, that I might be doing this episode in a British accent. Kind of like a football game where a clearly superior team is going against a clearly inferior team. So you have the British, obviously, as that superior team. They have better military organization. They have more weapons. They have more ships. They have more people enlisted in the army. They have more experience. This is the British Empire, in the late 1700s, the biggest empire in the world. and you have the clearly inferior team, which is the Americans. Okay, not really many people gave them much of a chance to win this war at the beginning of it. So if you're that inferior team, if you're the Americans, your goal is to just kind of hang around in the war. Okay, so don't get beat immediately, don't get beat right off the bat, don't get down 30 points in the first quarter. You just try and hang around, and then you hope at the end of the game that you have a chance to win. Okay, you have a chance to steal the game. So how the Americans planned to kind of steal the game was to just hang around. Hopefully the British, make some mistakes. Maybe you can get some foreign aid, some foreign intervention, and then all of a sudden you might have a chance to win this thing. So that's kind of the way I like to look at the American Revolution. And given that framework, it's entirely possible that the British didn't exactly take advantage of some of the early opportunities they had to end the war quickly, okay, because again, they thought they were that superior team, and they kind of thought that at the end of the day they were going to win this thing anyway. So historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in his book Valiant Ambition, he talks about this a little bit. Quote, "Rather than Washington and his army, it was the Howe brothers' misguided obsession with reaching a peace accord that saved America in the summer of 1776. End quote. So kind of to start this war, the British and, the Howe brothers in particular, they're the guys who are leading the British war effort, General William Howe and Richard Howe. They are kind of obsessed with getting a peace deal done. Okay, so they don't want to fight this war. They view these men as countrymen, fellow British people. They're colonies, but they're also British colonies. So they didn't really want to have a whole ton of bloodshed, so they didn't take advantage of some of those early opportunities that they had to win the war. And this is going to come back to bite them later, of course. So inside of this framework of the American army and the American people just trying to survive the early onslaught and keep this thing going as long as it can go without receiving a death blow from the British, we're going to enter in Benedict Arnold. Okay, so this will not be a comprehensive biography of Benedict Arnold or anything like that. This episode is mainly going to focus on what Benedict Arnold did during the war and why it might be influential, why it might kind of go against the traditional narrative that we typically see people talking about when it comes to Benedict Arnold. Okay, so who was Benedict Arnold? Well, Benedict Arnold is kind of like that guy at the bar, the slightly overweight guy at the bar who's sitting there obnoxiously yelling at the television, obnoxiously yelling to no one in particular, kind of annoying a certain segment of the customers while also being somewhat endearing to another portion of the customers. So Benedict Arnold was kind of a love him or hate him guy. Okay, people either loved him or they hated him. Okay, he was bold, he was arrogant, he had a quick temper, he said what was on his mind, he didn't hide behind words or anything like that, and at the same time, he was undoubtedly brave and courageous. Okay, so we're going to go into why that's the case, but Benedict Arnold is kind of that guy who's, people can get annoyed by him, but at the same time, you can't question the fact that he's bold, he's brave, and he's going to do what he thinks is right. And tragically for him, his wife died shortly before the American Revolution started. So a lot of historians, a lot of people who look at Benedict Arnold think that he kind of, threw his weight in with the American Revolution almost as a way to grieve. So he lost his wife, and a lot of people think that he just kind of put his whole soul into the American Revolution and just gave everything he had in order to, find something to believe in, find something to hold on to while he was going through that difficult time. So given this context, we can kind of see how his emotional moves and his kind of lack of respect for authority, how that might fit into that picture of Benedict Arnold. At the end of the day, he really makes his name as a soldier and as kind of a formidable human at what's called the Battle of Valcour Island. So at this Battle of Valcour Island, he makes his name as a sailor and someone who can be formidable in stopping the British and a real asset to guys like George Washington who are trying to find generals and leaders who can lead this war effort. So Valcour Island is located in Lake Champlain, which is located in upstate New York. And Lake Champlain has tributaries that connect into the St. Lawrence River in Canada. And of course, the British are controlling that area of Canada at this time in history. So the British kind of game plan to win this war is to have, the Howe brothers, they have their armies and their navy located in New York. They're taking territory there. They're going to chase Washington around and hopefully deal him a mortal blow. But they're also going to bring up this army from the north. And if this army can connect with Howe's army, they can crush the American Revolution in between them. So the goal was to move that army down Lake Champlain into upstate New York and then wreak havoc on New England, wreak havoc on the hopes of the American Revolution from there. So enter Benedict Arnold into this situation. So he knows that the British are going to be going from north to south. They're going to be trying to transport their troops through Lake Champlain, again, going from north to south, because A, they're going to have the wind with them, and B, it's very difficult to traverse that upstate New York territory on land. So he knows the British are going to want to do this over sea. And he knows the British are going to want to do this when they have the wind with them going from north to south, because it'll make their journey a little bit speedier, a little bit easier to control. So knowing this, he has a clearly inferior force. It's just called, he calls it the Mosquito Fleet. It's just a force of essentially rowboats and little schooners and, a handful of warships compared to the huge British naval attack that's going to be coming their way. So Benedict Arnold moves his fleet, his little Mosquito Fleet, into the bay at Valcour Island. So on this Lake Champlain, there's a little island a couple 100 yards off the shore, on the left-hand side of the lake, on the western side of the lake. So if you put your fleet inside of that bay, when the British are coming down, they're actually going to have their view of that fleet blocked by that Valcour Island. So Benedict Arnold's plan was that he would hide that fleet in the bay. The British would come flying down the lake. They would not be able to see the American fleet. And then once they got past the American fleet and once they got past Valcour Island, they would have to turn around to face the Americans. Now, why would this be a big deal? Because now all of a sudden the Americans have the advantage of the wind. So if the British wanted to destroy that American fleet, they would have to go upwind to do it instead of downwind. So now the Americans would have the advantage as far as that is concerned. And naval warfare like this is historically just a giant mess. So you have boats flying past each other, firing at each other. You have destruction everywhere. You have people flying overboard. You have fires, ships on fire. You have stuff blowing up. You have chunks of wood and chunks of, God knows what flying around. You have people trying to board ships. There's people fighting on the decks. So naval warfare is notoriously difficult to plan and difficult to engage in. So as the great historian Andrew Stevener once said, naval warfare, when it comes to that, there's death and destruction everywhere. So given that situation, you want to have as many advantages as you possibly can. And Benedict Arnold takes advantage of that wind situation. Now, once the battle actually starts, once the fighting happens, the British essentially whip the Americans. They have the superior force, they have more firepower, and the Americans are getting crushed. So Benedict Arnold has a couple choices. He can retreat back north and essentially give the British that pathway towards Fort Ticonderoga, give them the pathway towards, the mainland of America, or he can retreat directly through the enemy. So Benedict Arnold chooses option 2, and amazingly, in an incredible feat, he waits till night. He transports his little fleet through the British lines, which is pretty incredible, and he makes it past them. Now, this allows the Americans to regroup, and it forces the British to have to turn around and wait until next summer, because this was happening in late October of 1776, and you don't want to be traveling on the lake during the winter. So the British were forced, because they couldn't crush that enemy, they couldn't crush Arnold's fleet, they're forced to turn around and have to wait until next summer. So again, in this football game of let's just try and hang around in that first quarter, second quarter, and maybe we'll have a chance to win at the end. Okay, Benedict Arnold helps the Americans by forcing the British to retreat back north and keeping the Americans hanging on to a thread in 1776. So after the battle at Valcour Island, Benedict Arnold becomes a little bit of a hero. Okay, the common people know about him, his reputation is improved, and people respect what he's doing. Now, he's going to go back home for a little while. He's going to go back to New England. He's going to go back to his everyday life for a little bit. So at some point, he's going to fall in love with a girl named Elizabeth de Bois. When I say girl, I mean girl. She was 16 years old. So at the time, he was 36, and at the time, she was 16 years old. So a bit creepy, I know, but again, the standards of today not always applied to the standards of the 1700s. So Benedict Arnold's plan to woo this young girl is he's going to get a trunk of clothes. He's going to fill it with all sorts of dresses and clothes and stuff like that, and he's going to send her the trunk of clothes. Okay, so if you're listening to this episode and wondering how you're going to ask out that girl, don't do what Benedict Arnold did. Okay, don't send her a trunk of clothes because that's weird and creepy. So the girl rejects the trunk of clothes. Benedict Arnold is humiliated in front of the whole town, the whole country, essentially. And this contributes to a little bit of the destabilization in Benedict Arnold's life. So he gets rejected by this girl. He starts womanizing a little bit more. He becomes a notorious, quote-unquote, woman hunter, woman hunting. He wants to be known for that, and he kind of brags about that in his journal entries. And Benedict Arnold also loves spending money. So before the war, he was a wealthy guy, and he kind of pumped a lot of that money, a lot of that resources into the revolution, and he started losing his fortune. Okay, so he wants essentially a promotion during this time period. So he's already lost his wife. He's rejected by that girl that he, supposedly loves. He starts becoming a little bit of a womanizer, and now he's lost essentially most of his money. Okay, so things are not going great for Benedict Arnold's personal life, even though what he's doing on the battlefield is pretty triumphant. And rumors about his personal life began to circulate, and they began to actually impact his professional life. So here's an example of kind of one of those rumors that was flying around from people who knew Arnold and people who were influential. So here's just one thing by a guy named John Brown, this thing was published in kind of a newspaper type situation. Quote, "Money is this man's god, and to get enough of it, he would sacrifice his country." End quote. So kind of prophetic words in one sense, but also stuff like this, rumors like this are beginning to circulate, and it's impacting the way people see Benedict Arnold. And it's also impacting the way the Continental Congress, okay, the people who are essentially in charge of Benedict Arnold, in charge of the war effort, it's impacting how they're, using him, how they're promoting him, how they're demoting him, as Arnold sees it. So the rumors began to circulate, and everything begins to come unhinged for Benedict Arnold. And after that Battle of Valcour Island, Benedict Arnold goes to the Continental Congress. He asks for a promotion, whether that's to build up his self-esteem, that seems to have taken a hit, or whether that's, to actually get some more money because he's losing his fortune. We're unsure of that, but nonetheless, the Continental Congress denies him. Benedict Arnold does not get that promotion, and this is going to basically sow the seeds of conflict between those two entities, Benedict Arnold and the Continental Congress. There's a lack of trust, and that's going to be very important later in the story. And again, now kind of back to that guy at the bar analogy. So he's already, obnoxious and kind of bold and arrogant, and people are kind of either enjoying the show or really disliking what he's doing. Okay, now you're adding in kind of that womanizing factor. He's been rejected by, the love of his life. You can imagine, that guy at the bar kind of, approaching women, being obnoxious, doing things like that. Okay, and you can also imagine him, buying people drinks, buying people food, okay, just generally being obnoxious that way, and he's losing his fortune, he's losing his money. So this kind of image of Benedict Arnold, okay, should start making a little bit more sense as we go through, because now he wants that promotion in order to try and rectify some of the things he had been doing beforehand. So this is Benedict Arnold's frame of mind as we get to the next kind of big moment in his military career. Okay, the first one being that Battle of Valcour Island, which obviously was a huge contribution to the American success in the American Revolution. And now his next big contribution is going to be what's known as the Raid on Danbury. Now this raid on Danbury is going to be a little bit similar to Lexington and Concord, okay, earlier in this whole story. So the British were interested in going to Danbury, which is a town in Connecticut, and they wanted to destroy basically these ammunition stores that were kind of stockpiled there. So guns, gunpowder, weapons, that type of stuff. So they hoped that by eliminating this ammunition house, they could deal a blow to the American war effort. So Benedict Arnold hears about this, and he rallies up about a couple hundred militiamen, and they go to attack the British basically straight on to try and prevent them from getting this ammunition supply and getting that blow to the American war effort. Ultimately, Benedict Arnold and his men are going to lose this battle, but the significance of it is that, again, Benedict Arnold shows that bravery. He shows that ability to rise above the normal everyday soldier and really be an excellent leader on the battlefield and really prove his bravery and prove his courage. So here's, again, historian Nathaniel Philbrick talking about what happened at this battle. So Benedict Arnold's men are going to be basically fleeing, and he's going to take up the account with what Benedict Arnold was doing. Quote, "His men were fleeing all around him, but Arnold refused to yield. His horse was ultimately hit by 9 different musket balls before the stricken animal collapsed to the ground. His legs ensnared in the stirrups, Arnold struggled to untangle himself as a well-known Connecticut loyalist rushed him with a fixed bayonet. 'Surrender,' the loyalist cried. 'You are a prisoner.' Reaching for the 2 pistols in the holsters of his saddle, Arnold was reputed to have said, 'Not yet,' before shooting the loyalist dead. He soon extricated himself from the stirrups and escaped into the nearby swamp." End quote. Okay, so Benedict Arnold had not 1, but 2 horses shot out from under him. Okay, and if you don't know anything about, kind of these old school battles with, cavalry and stuff like that, if your horse got shot out from under you, your chances of surviving that encounter, okay, are drastically diminished. So Arnold had not 1, but 2 horses shot out under him. Okay, so this is an incredible display of bravery and kind of that courageousness that makes Benedict Arnold such a great leader. Okay, and, let it be said that real leaders lead on the front lines of the battle. Okay, real leaders do not lead from the rear, and Benedict Arnold, by all accounts, was a real leader who kind of, his men loved him, and you can see why with stories like that where he's going in and he's, demonstrating all that incredible war prowess. So this raid on Danbury happens in 1777, and it's about a year after the Valcour Island battle. And the Continental Congress eventually, they kind of hear the stories. The people love Benedict Arnold for this and what he did here at Danbury, and they decide to give him kind of a half promotion. Okay, so they give him the title he wants, but in reality, he's still subordinate to 5 other generals who got promoted ahead of him. So it's kind of like they gave him a promotion, but by promoting all those other people, well, is it really a promotion, or is it just he's at the same spot he was? Okay, so this is going to, again, contribute to that rift between Benedict Arnold and the Continental Congress. And if you remember that personal situation that Benedict is in, then all of a sudden we can see that, things are not going as well for him on a personal level. Maybe even as his battlefield experience is getting better and he's performing more and more heroic feats on the battlefield. Meanwhile, back on Lake Champlain in the summer of 1777, the British have made their breakthrough. Okay, so Benedict Arnold was able to delay that British incursion that was coming, and he delayed it almost a full year. And finally, the British are breaking through. So now times are pretty dire for the Americans. It looks like the British have that Northern Army, and they're going to start, marching in towards the United States. So not the best time for the Americans. As the British are making their way across upstate New York, they get to a fort called Stanwix. Okay, so what's known as the Siege of Stanwix begins, and essentially 700 Americans are trapped in this fort. The British have it surrounded. The British also have some Native American Iroquois allies who are helping them out, and it looks dire for the Americans in the situation. So enter, of course, Benedict Arnold. So Benedict Arnold gets just outside of Stanwix, and he kind of surveys the situation. And what he sees is that the British have a pretty big army surrounding the fort, and there's no way that Benedict Arnold and his smaller force is going to be able to overtake what the British have set up there. So in an amazing move, Benedict Arnold engages in what's known as diplomacy. Okay, so we've seen it over and over again, a bit of a theme on the podcast, that diplomacy can actually be incredibly useful and incredibly effective during wars. Okay, so a lot of times diplomacy is seen as not exactly a strong option, but it can be strong when used correctly. So Benedict Arnold essentially found somebody who was sympathetic with the Iroquois allies that the British had. Okay, so they knew him well, and he was in the area. And Benedict Arnold pretends, he's the only one that knows this, and I think it was one other guy who's, actually it might have been his idea, there's debate about whose idea it was, but he pretends to hang the man for treason. Okay, if he doesn't go into the British camp telling them that Benedict Arnold has a massive army and they're coming down and the British better run away. Okay, so it's a bit of a last-ditch effort, but it's an effort nonetheless. So this guy kind of shows up, he's got bullet holes in his jacket, and he starts yelling around the British camp that the Americans are coming and they got a huge force and they're going to blow everybody away. Okay, so the Iroquois hear this, they bail out. The British are now left without their allies, and being a little more cautious than perhaps they should have been, the British decide, you know what, this little force is not worth it. We're just going to bail out. Okay, so Benedict Arnold's kind of trick, his little show of diplomacy there, ends up working. He lifts the siege of Stanwix. And again, we have another example of Benedict Arnold contributing to the war effort and saving a lot of American lives. So if you're keeping track at home, we now have the Battle at Valcour Island, we have the raid on Danbury, and we have the siege of Stanwix, which are all examples of Benedict Arnold literally going out there saving American lives and saving the American Revolution to a certain extent. Okay, so when we talk about Benedict Arnold, yes, he does end up being that villain, but we also got to recognize the contributions that he made to the war effort. Okay, and here is where I think that the wheels kind of start to come off for Benedict Arnold, and it's going to happen at the battle of what's known as the Battle of Saratoga. Okay, so the Battle of Saratoga is actually has a couple of battles, smaller scale battles that we kind of, we lump them all together and we call it the Battle of Saratoga. Now, obviously a big American victory, and this is going to lead to, other countries beginning to realize that, hey, America can maybe win this thing. And this is kind of that moment, back in the football analogy where you kind of realize, holy crap, this team was losing the whole time, but now they actually have a chance to win this thing. So Benedict Arnold plays a key role, and we'll see why. But again, the wheels appear to be coming off at this point for Benedict Arnold. So he's placed under the command of a guy named Horatio Gates, who he doesn't like, and who doesn't seem to trust Arnold or respect him. And Benedict Arnold is basically going around the camp, just openly talking about how he doesn't like the commander, how he thinks they should be doing things differently, all this type of thing. So remember, Arnold's kind of that guy at the bar who's just kind of a loudmouth, obnoxiously saying what's on his mind. Okay, so what ends up happening is that in a kind of a bizarre event, Benedict Arnold's men, him and his men go out, and they end up killing 14 unarmed British foragers. Okay, so this was not exactly Benedict Arnold's finest moment, and it's not something that the rest of the American army was proud of, certainly. Now, as far as Benedict Arnold at the actual battle, The first phase of the Battle of Saratoga is called the Battle of Freeman's Farm, and Benedict Arnold's men play a huge role in this. Okay, so they end up killing about 700 British soldiers. They only lose about 150. Unfortunately for Arnold, Horatio Gates does not allow him to actually take part in the battle. So remember that Benedict Arnold is one of those guys who wants to be in the thick of things with his friends, with his, comrades in the battle. And not being able to participate, he has to command from the rear. That kills Benedict Arnold. Okay, that's something that really crushes him. Now, the second part of the Battle of Saratoga is something called the Battle at Bemis Heights. So Benedict Arnold, again, is not allowed to partake in the battle, and this time he doesn't take things so lightly. Okay, so Arnold's probably unhinged at this point. Remember, he's got issues in his personal life. He's got rumors circulating all around him that all he cares about is money, and, all his romantic situations are out, for everybody to see, and he's under the command. He's not getting these promotions. Okay, so he has somewhat of a reason to be upset. So he can't command his men. To him, this is just terrible. And he actually goes home, or, goes back to his barracks. Okay, gets drunk. Okay, allegedly takes a bunch of drugs. And he comes out of his gates, comes out of his, barracks, essentially a raving, crazy man. So again, he goes to the barracks, he gets drunk, he engages in, allegedly, some light opium use, and he comes out and dashes into the fight like a raving madman. So he's at the Battle of Bemis Heights, and immediately he dashes in there, and he identifies one of the British commanders who he thinks is basically organizing the war effort for the British. So if he can eliminate that commander, then all of a sudden the Americans are going to contribute to a huge victory here at Saratoga. So Arnold orders some people to go attack that guy. They kill him, and allegedly that's what leads to the Americans kind of surging through the lines and ultimately contributing to a win at the Battle of Saratoga, which of course is going to be huge for the American Revolution. Okay, so Benedict Arnold, being the raving madman at this point, he keeps on charging into enemy lines. Okay, he's trying to deliver, a huge death blow, not just a victory here. And he gets shot down, he gets severely crippled, severely wounded, and he gets carried off the battlefield. So this moment in time is often seen as kind of the transition point from where Benedict Arnold goes from, Benedict Arnold the hero to Benedict Arnold the villain. And from this point forward, it's less about Benedict Arnold and his heroic deeds and more about his kind of slow and treacherous descent into villainy. So up to this point, what makes Benedict Arnold a hero? Okay, well, here's a man who risked it all time and time again, for the United States of America. Okay, so Benedict Arnold, there can be no doubt, single-handedly saved the lives of hundreds of Americans. Okay, there's simply no argument with that. Okay, and he committed acts of bravery and acts of courageousness that rank right up there with some of the greatest generals in the American Revolution. Okay, there's a reason that when he ends up defecting, this becomes such a big deal, big story, because he was one of the best. Okay, he was one of the best soldiers, he was one of the bravest soldiers, and that is why this was such a big deal when the script flips. Now, what were the underlying motives for why Benedict Arnold was doing these courageous acts? Well, that matters. Okay, was it money? Was it fame? Was it fortune? Okay, it's difficult to know. Maybe it was something else. Okay, maybe it was grief for his wife. Okay, again, that was something we proposed, that he kind of just charged head forward into the American Revolution, and from there he kind of becomes a changed man. I don't know. It's difficult to know. Again, what we do know is that Benedict Arnold contributed significantly to the American war effort, and he contributed to saving countless American lives. So when we discuss his kind of downfall into the Hall of Shame, which we'll get into in part 2 of the series, always keep in mind that somewhere within that complicated figure of Benedict Arnold, there was a hero that the American people respected. If you like this episode of the podcast, or any of the previous episodes, you can leave a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening to it on. I'm told this helps spread the podcast to people who might be interested in listening to it somehow. So that would be fantastic if you could do that. If you didn't like the episode, you can leave me an angry tweet and we can talk about why it was terrible. Ultimately, I'm just glad you're out there listening. So that being said, thanks for listening.